Demographics, Autosave. This only affects the patient demographics. In other words, instead of clicking on the Save button every time you're in the patient demographics, do you want to just be able to bounce around in it and have it automatically save for you? For example, I'm going to click on the blue dude. That's the patient demographics. And the patient demographics is basically all the patient's information. There's so much information you can't fit it all in one screen here. You can see down at the bottom we have additional tabs for additional information on the patient. You got a save button on every tab. Now, do you want to have to save it every time you enter in information, or do you just want to be able to bounce around from tab to tab and have it automatically save for you? If you do, then we'll go back to the system default and say yes. It's kind of like a nice backup feature. I still say by default you want to click save every chance you get, just in case here. Zip code. Is there a particular zip code where you see maybe more than 50% of your patients are from, like 84117? If so, you can type it in here, so when you start typing in the patient's demographics or the patient name, you don't have to type in 84117 because by default, again system defaults, it'll populate for you. If you really can't narrow it down, that's okay. You just leave it blank and then you'll have to enter it in manually every time. And also keep in mind, because it is defaults, if you do have 84117 as the default, the patient's from 84112, then go ahead and you can delete it when you're in the patient demographics and override it. So it's not permanent, it's just a field pulling a default for you. Use country code, yes or no. If you have patients or facilities residing outside of the US, you'll want to use the country code and say yes. Patient. Chart number. Do you want your chart number set up in AdvancedMD to go automatically or manually? In other words, back to the patient demographics here. Every time I enter in a new patient, a chart number is automatically assigned to it, and you can see it by auto. If not, you're going to have to type it in here. There's pros and cons to this. First of all, the pro for auto is you don't have to keep track of it all. The con for doing it manual is that you're going to have to type it in every time and keep track of the chart numbers. Most offices prefer it doing automatically for them. Consent document is for a future AdvancedMD enhancement. We'll skip that, go to default gender. So in the patient demographics, does your practice mostly see males or females? It just defaults to male, and so if every other patient or 5 or 6 patients is a female, in the patient demographics you can certainly change it, but the default would be male. For right now, I'm going to leave it as unknown. Financial class, your office key may be blank here, or it may have some other default here. What I recommend is putting in change this, because the financial class defines the system, tells the system how we want to bill the patient's insurance carrier, and it's very important that we have those set up. So by default, when you have a new patient, you're typing it in. If you don't set up the financial class right, for example, when I go to the patient demographics, so after I type in the basic patient information, down below you can see the financial class. If I go ahead and save it without changing it, then that tells me that something's wrong. I actually need to set up the financial class correctly. And long story short, your financial class is basically your primary insurance carrier, and you're going to have that in 2 places. Your insurance carrier is going to be on the insurance tab, but you're also going to define it here as your financial class. And if they don't have insurance, it'll be self-pay. So the reason why I say change it to change this, that's a big, huge flag to tell us that we didn't set up on this patient the financial class correctly. And of course, if you don't have it here, just go ahead and click on it, delete it, click on your ellipsis button. And you can see I have many financial class set up, but because this is your new office key, you won't have many. I'm going to go ahead and double click on change this. Provider profile. Also in the patient demographics, just right below change this that we just looked at in the other screen, is a provider profile. By default, if you're one doctor office, you may want to select Dr. Bob Smith and say that every patient that comes through is going to be, the default doctor is going to be Dr. Smith. If you have more than one doctor, 2 or 3 doctors, then you'll want to leave that blank, and then just set them up as you go, patient by patient. Last, use chart number. If you select it automatically up here for AdvancedMD to assign the chart numbers for you, then down here it will tell you what the last chart number used was. And in fact, you can see I have 53 patients entered into the system, and of course when I enter in number 54, this will change to number 54. New patient consent, days until expiration. Go ahead and type the days of 90, 60 days that their consent forms are valid for. You can leave it at 0 and manually do it, or put in a default. Require date of birth, social security number, so when you're typing in the patient demographics and they don't have a date of birth or social and you click save, it won't let you save it. So you want to be careful if you actually want to require this. However, there's a workaround, at least for the social security number. If you say yes for date of birth And yes, for social, at least for social, you can enter in all zeros if they don't have their social security number, and that will be able to let you save it anyways. However, if you have more than one patient that has the same social security number, or in this case you have many patients you don't have socials on, but you put all zeros in for all of them, it'll give you a pop-up memo telling you, hey, you got duplicate in here of all zeros with another patient who has all zeros. Do you want to click save? Go ahead and say yes. That's a nice feature in case if you actually do have a patient that has the same social as another, then you'll know that something's going on and you don't want to save it. So that's a workaround, entering in all zeros if you decide to require them. Use employer master file. What that means is if you set it to no on the patient demographics, the very first screen that we've been working on recently here in this video, right now, because it's set to no, it's not going to have a master file or an employer master file you can click on to choose an employer. If you say yes, that means you have to contact Advanced MD Support and have them get it set up. But if you say yes, then you'll get an option, a field that you can pull and tie the employer to the employee. Now that means that if you're doing a lookup field on the patient demographics of an employer, where do all the employers sit? Well, once you set this up and you change this to yes through Advanced MD Support, then you can go to Master Files, down to Employers. And here's where you'd set them up. You go ahead and type in the name, address, zip code, contact, all the information here. And you can see one that I created already. When I click on it, it populates the fields. Just very basic. So on the patient demographics, if the employer is constructive, because maybe 99% of the patients actually come from the employer constructive, or maybe they work for HP Computers and I treat most of their employees here. Well, at least I have a master file here that I now can assign and pull into each patient. Self to responsible party. What that means in the patient demographics, when you type in the patient's name, and we'll zip up here real quick, you see where it says patient name, you type in the patient's name. Who's the responsible party? Now, responsible party in Advanced MD means who's getting the statement. It has nothing to do if they hold insurance or not, or if they're a self-pay. It just means who's getting the statement. Well, 99% of the time, usually it's the patient, so there's the word self. The cool thing is that after I type in the patient information and just the patient's name, but I leave that alone, when I click save, this automatically updates and changes from self to the patient's name. It's kind of a cool little coding there, or shortcut there, that I don't have to type in the full patient's name if I just leave it as self. However, if this is blank, then of course I'll have to type in the patient's name here, and if they're that are going to be getting the statements, type in their name here as well. But I can eliminate all that if I just leave the default to self. And by the same token, if the responsible party or who's getting the statements isn't the patient, let's say it's a rich aunt or uncle, then go ahead and just type in last name, comma first, and you can learn this later on when you're watching the patient demographics and how to enter in the information. Responsible party. Do we want to require the responsible party to have a date of birth? In other words, after we're entering in the patient, done with that, this is the person who's going to get the statements. For example, go back up to the blue dude here. Here's the patient, the first tab down at the bottom or the first screen. The responsible party tab is still tied to the patient, but this is asking who's going to get the statement. Is it still going to be the patient? If the patient is set to self, then we're okay. We can leave this alone because whatever we type on this tab is automatically going to pull over to this tab as the responsible party. Now, if the responsible party is a rich uncle, for example, patient Bob has a rich uncle to Lewis, then Lewis's name is going to pull over here, just his name, but the default address is going to be the patient's home address. So in any case, what we're saying here is that is the home address of the patient going to be the same as Uncle Bob? You can make the changes, whatever you need to do to make sure the statement gets to the right responsible party. And of course, over here we have the date of birth and the social security number. So having said that, we go back to system defaults, and we want to require, when saving the responsible party information, their date of birth. Now, when it comes to collecting, it's a good idea to have that on file. Whether you want to require it or not means that when you click save, if they don't have it, it won't let you save it. Also, for the social security, just like we talked about in the patient here, if we don't have it, you can put in all zeros and it'll still save. And then do you want to use the HIPAA responsible party compliant relationships? I would say yes. In fact, on this one, I would say the default for most offices is yes. And all that means is when you go back to the patient demographics, not on the responsible party tab here, but back on the patient, you see this HIPAA relation? It's asking what's the relationship of the patient here to the responsible party. Now, it could be self, and usually most of the time it is. The patient is the responsible party. But what if it's that rich uncle? Or what if it's a child here. The patient is the child and the responsible party is the parent. So the relationship is the child. So when you phrase it this way, what's the relationship of the patient to the responsible party? It's the child to the parent, and the responsible party is the parent. And you'll watch a training video on that, but I'm giving you a heads up as far as setting up your system defaults. So I would go ahead and say yes. Of course, if you say no, you don't get the drop-down arrow. Basically the same thing as patient responsible party, but this time it's regarding the policyholder. Do we want to have the policyholder date of birth and social security number required, meaning that we can't save it unless we have it? Also, do we want to use the insurance HIPAA compliant relationships? This is the same thing as the responsible party. In that, with the responsible party, when I go back to the patient demographics, we're defining the relationship of the patient here to the responsible party who's getting the statements. Whereas on the insurance, we're defining the relationship of the patient to the policyholder whose name is going to be here. And it can be self. The patient can actually have their own insurance or be their own policyholder. If not, it could be the child is the patient, and so we'll go ahead and select child. And that's their relationship to the subscriber or policyholder, that this patient is the child. Next, social security number to subscriber ID. What that means is on the patient demographics page here, when you enter in their social, do you want it to automatically default to as their subscriber ID? Most insurance carriers are doing away with the social security number, but nonetheless, even if it defaults here, you can delete it and type over it. So I'll leave that up to you. Documents and images.